The galaxy laughed at humans. Until the first fleet arrived, the Great Hall of the Concorde Station stretched for nearly a kilometer, and every seat was filled with representatives from the most powerful species in the galaxy. Ambassador Vathor of the Cathori Dominion stood at the central podium. His forearms spread wide as he addressed the assembly, and so I told the human delegate that perhaps they could contribute to our alliance by providing entertainment, he said, and laughter filled the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. The Cathori were tall beings with scales of deep purple and eyes that glowed with ancient wisdom, and they had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 15,000 years. They found humans amusing in the way that a grown adult might find a child playing with wooden swords amusing. The Concorde of 13 had existed for longer than human civilization itself, and its member species had mastered technologies that humans could barely understand. They bent space and time to their will, communicated through thought alone, and lived for thousands of years. When human explorers had first ventured beyond their solar system a century ago, the Concorde had watched with mild curiosity. The humans had arrived in ships that moved at speeds the Concorde considered painfully slow, powered by engines that burned chemical fuel like primitive torches in the darkness of space. Their first contact had been with the Morthani, a species of gentle giants who studied the stars and kept records of every sentient race they encountered. The Morthani had added humans to their great catalog with a note that simply read, "Fragile bipeds, limited potential, no significant abilities detected." This assessment had spread through the Concorde like a joke passed between friends at a party. Humans had no natural weapons and no claws or fangs or venom, and their soft skin could be pierced by the simplest blade. They could not see in the dark like the Valori, or breathe underwater like the Tassani, or survive in the vacuum of space like the crystalline Sharath. Ear minds were closed to telepathy. Their bodies required constant maintenance, and they aged and died in what other species considered the blink of an eye. A human who lived for 100 years was considered ancient, while Cathori children were often older than human grandparents. The assembly continued to laugh as Vathor shared more stories about the strange creatures from the small blue planet called Earth. They actually sleep for 8 hours every single day, he announced, and gasps of disbelief mixed with more laughter. They drink water constantly, or they simply stop functioning, and their bodies break down if the temperature changes by more than a few degrees. A delegate from the Shorath Collective raised a crystalline appendage to speak. How has such a species survived at all? She asked. Genuine confusion in her harmonic voice. Vathor made a gesture that served as a shrug among his people. Their planet is remarkably gentle with them, he explained, and they had no natural predators intelligent enough to hunt them to extinction before they develop basic tools. They are lucky. Nothing more. In the far corner of the Great Hall, in seats reserved for observers of no importance, 3 humans sat in silence. Captain Sarah Chun wore the simple uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, and her face showed no emotion as the laughter continued. Beside her sat Commander David Okonkwo and Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, both equally still and equally silent. They had been sent to formally request membership in the Concorde, and they had known before arriving that they would be rejected. What the laughing assembly did not know was that rejection had always been the plan. Captain Chun had spent 20 years in military intelligence before taking this diplomatic post, and she understood something that the ancient species of the Concorde had forgotten. She understood that being underestimated was one of the greatest advantages any force could possess. The formal vote took less than an hour, and humanity was granted provisional observer status by a margin that was almost unanimous. This meant they could watch Concorde proceedings, but could not vote, could not trade freely, and could not access Concorde technology. They were given a single star system in the outer reach, a region of space so far from anything important that most species have forgotten it. existed. The system contained 3 barren planets, an asteroid belt of moderate size, and a yellow star that the Concorde considered utterly unremarkable. Ambassador Vather personally delivered the news to the human delegation with a smile that showed all 40 of his teeth. "We hope you understand that this is quite generous," he said in a tone that suggested he expected gratitude. Captain Chen bowed her head in a gesture of acceptance. "We are honored by the Concorde's kindness," she replied, and her voice carried no trace of sarcasm. "We will make good use of our new home." Vather laughed again. "A sound like stones grinding together. I am sure you will try," he said. And then he walked away without looking back. The 3 humans remained in their seats until the great hall had emptied completely only. Then did Captain Chun allow herself to smile. "They gave us exactly what we needed," she said quietly. Commander Okonkwo nodded, his dark eyes scanning the empty chamber for any sign of surveillance. A system with asteroid mining potential, gas giants for fuel harvesting, and a position far enough from Concorde space that we can work without being watched. Lieutenant Tanaka pulled out a small device and began recording notes. "I counted 17 different weapon systems in this station alone," she reported, "and I identified weaknesses in at least 12 of them. Their shield technology is powerful but slow to adapt, and their point defense systems have a 2-second delay between target acquisition and firing." Captain Chun stood and adjusted her uniform. "Transmit everything to Earth Command through the secure channel," she ordered. "They think we are children playing with toys, and we are going to let them keep thinking that until we are ready." "Ready for what?" Lieutenant Tanaka asked. Though she already knew the answer, Captain Chun looked out through the viewport at the endless stars that filled the galaxy. Stars that belonged to species who saw humanity as nothing more than a joke. "Ready for whatever comes next," she said. "The Concorde has grown comfortable and lazy, and comfortable and lazy civilizations always attract predators. When that predator arrives, we will be ready to fight it, and we will show the galaxy what humanity can truly do." She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. "Let them laugh for now," she said. "We have work to do." Far away, in the dark space between galaxies, something ancient was stirring. Something that had slept for 12,000 years and was finally beginning to wake. It was hungry, and it remembered the taste of civilizations that had grown comfortable and lazy. The galaxy continued to laugh at the small creatures from the small blue planet, unaware that those creatures were building something in the shadows of their forgotten corner of space. Humanity had learned a simple truth that the ancient species had forgotten long ago. The universe was not kind, and it did not care about elegance or tradition or ancient wisdom. It only cared about survival. And humans had been surviving against impossible odds since they first crawled out of the mud of their homeworld. They would survive this too, and they would do it in their own way. The laughter of the Concorde echoed through the stars, but it would not last forever. Nothing ever did. The galaxy laughed at humans until the first fleet arrived. 12,000 years was a long time, even for species that lived for millennia. And the Concorde had forgotten what true fear felt like. The first warning came from a mining colony on the edge of the Telesur sector. A routine transmission that cut off mid-sentence and was replaced by static. The Concorde paid little attention because mining colonies had problems all the time, and a communications failure was hardly worth noting. Then the second warning came, and the third. And within a week, an entire sector had gone silent. Admiral Korath of the Keth Ori battle fleet was dispatched to investigate with a force of 200 warships, the largest military deployment in 3 centuries. He was confident and proud as his fleet entered the Telesur sector, certain that they would find nothing more than a technical malfunction or perhaps a minor pirate incursion. What he found instead was a nightmare from ancient history. The Vectari swarm had returned. They came in ships that looked like living things, Massive vessels of chitin and bone to move through space like predators hunting prey. Each ship contained millions of creatures that existed for only one purpose: to consume everything in their path and convert it into more of their own kind. The ancient texts called them the Devourers, the species that had nearly destroyed the galaxy before the founders of the Concord drove them into the void between stars. But those founders were dead now, and their weapons were lost. And the current generation had never faced anything more dangerous than trade disputes and diplomatic arguments. Admiral Korath ordered his fleet to engage. And for a brief moment his ships filled space with brilliant energy beams and elegant plasma torpedoes. Vecturi absorbed the attack like an ocean absorbing raindrops. Their ships split apart and reformed, and smaller vessels poured from their hulls in numbers that defied counting. Korath watched his fleet die around him. 200 ships reduced to burning wreckage in less than an hour. His final transmission reached Concord Command just before his flagship was torn apart. "They are endless," he screamed into the communicator, "and we cannot stop them. The swarm has returned, and the gods help us all." Then there was only silence. Panic spread through the Concord faster than any disease could have traveled. The Grand Assembly convened an emergency session, and for the first time in centuries, the great hall was filled not with laughter, but with fear. Species that had not spoken to each other in decades suddenly begged for alliance. Ancient enemies offered truces and treaties, anything that might help them survive what was coming. Ambassador Vather stood at the same podium where he had mocked humanity just decades before. But now his voice trembled as he addressed the assembly. "We must combine our forces," he declared. Though his words carried little conviction, the swarm is powerful, but together we can surely find a way to defeat them. But even as he spoke, more reports arrived from the Telesur sector. 3 core worlds had fallen, their populations of billions reduced to nothing more than raw material for the swarm's endless hunger. The Vecturi did not negotiate, and did not accept surrender, and did not show mercy. They simply consumed. And then they moved on to consume more. The Morthani representative rose to speak, her giant form shaking with a terror her species had not felt since they first achieved sentience. "The ancient texts speak of weapons that our founders used against the swarm," she said. "But those weapons were destroyed after the First War because they were considered too dangerous to preserve. We have nothing that can fight this enemy." Despair settled over the assembly like a physical weight. Species that had ruled the stars for thousands of years now faced extinction, and they had no idea how to prevent it. In that moment of silence, a small light appeared on the communications console, a signal from the outer reach. From the forgotten system where humanity had been exiled. The technician almost ignored it. But something made him open the channel. A single message appeared on the screen in simple text that needed no translation. "We are coming." It was signed by something called the Terran Hegemony, a name that no one in the Concord recognized. Ambassador Vather read the message and made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "The humans," he said to the assembly. "The humans say they are coming to help." For a moment there was silence. And then someone in the back of the chamber did laugh. A short and bitter sound. "What can they possibly do?" asked the Shorth delegate. "They have no fleet worth mentioning. No weapons that could scratch a Vecturi hull. No experience in warfare at any scale. They will die like insects, and their deaths will mean nothing." Vather nodded in agreement and deleted the message from the console without sending a reply. Humanity was irrelevant. A joke that no one found funny anymore. The Concord had real problems to solve, and no time to waste on creatures who still measured their lifespans in decades. What the Concord did not know, what they could not possibly have imagined, was that humanity had not been idle during their century of exile. The small blue planet called Earth had changed in ways that would have terrified the ancient founders of the Concorde themselves beneath the surfaces of moons, inside hollowed asteroids, hidden in the shadows of gas giants. Humanity had built something. They had taken every piece of technology they could observe, or steal, or reverse engineer, and they had made it better. They had studied the Concorde's weapons and found them elegant but outdated. Designed for wars fought millennia ago against enemies that no longer existed, they had analyzed the swarm from fragments of ancient data and realized what the Concorde had forgotten: the Vecturi were not invincible. They were simply ruthless, and ruthlessness was something that humanity understood very well in the depths of Sol System. Construction yards worked around the clock to finish the final preparation ships, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen moved into formation. Their hulls black as the void between stars. Admiral Yuki Tanaka, the same young lieutenant who had once counted weapons on the Concorde station, now stood on the bridge of a dreadnought called the Perseverance. She had spent 50 years preparing for this moment, and she felt no fear as she looked at the tactical display showing the swarm's advance around her. 10,000 crew members waited for orders behind her. 300 warships powered up their engines across human space. Millions of soldiers checked their weapons and said goodbye to their families. The message to the Concorde had been a courtesy. Nothing more. Humanity did not need permission to fight for the galaxy. They had been ready for this war since the moment the Concorde first laughed at them. Now they would show everyone what that laughter had cost. The first fleet began to move, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The galaxy laughed at humans until the first fleet arrived. The surviving ships of the Kethori fleet hung in orbit above Telesur Prime, their crews watching helplessly as the swarm devoured the planet below. Billions of people had lived on that world just days ago, and now there was nothing left but a brown and barren rock stripped of all life. Commander Thiessen gripped the arms of her command chair and tried to keep her voice steady as she addressed what remained of the Concorde forces. "We cannot hold this position," she announced through the fleet channel. "All ships prepare to retreat to the secondary defense line." She knew that the secondary defense line would fall just as quickly as the first, and the line after that, and the line after that. The swarm seemed to grow stronger with every world it consumed, converting the matter of entire planets into more ships and more soldiers at the current rate of advance. The Concorde homeworlds would fall within months. There was nowhere to run that the swarm could not follow. A sensor officer suddenly straightened in her seat, her purple scales turning pale with shock. "Commander," she called out, "I am detecting unknown vessels emerging from fold space." Thiessen turned to look at the tactical display, expecting to see more swarm ships arriving to finish the destruction. What she saw instead made no sense at all. 300 ships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls painted in colors of black and silver that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. They were angular and sharp, where Concorde ships were curved and elegant, and they bristled with weapons that the computer could not identify. The largest vessel at the center of the formation was enormous, nearly 6 kilometers long, dwarfing even the biggest swarm hive ships. A transmission came through on all frequencies, and a human face appeared on every screen in the fleet. It was a woman with gray hair and dark eyes that seemed to look straight through the display into the souls of everyone watching. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Hegemony First Fleet," she said, a voice that carried absolute authority. "All Concorde vessels are ordered to clear the engagement zone immediately. We are about to demonstrate why you should have taken us seriously." Commander Thiessen stared at the screen in disbelief. Humans, the same creatures that the Concorde had dismissed as primitive and irrelevant, had somehow built a war fleet that made her own ships look like toys. How was this possible? Where had these weapons come from? What had humanity been doing in their forgotten corner of space? She had no time to find answers because the human fleet was already moving. The ships accelerated at speeds that should have killed their crews, pulling maneuvers that Concord vessels could never match. Admiral Tanaka watched the swarm advance on her tactical display with calm focus. She had studied these creatures for decades, analyzed every fragment of data from the ancient war, and planned this battle 1,000 times in simulation. The victory fought with numbers and adaptation, overwhelming enemies through sheer mass and adjusting their tactics to counter any defense. But they had never faced an enemy like humanity. All ships, execute attack pattern Omega-7, she ordered. Kinetic batteries. Target the largest hive vessels. Beam arrays. Focus on the fighter swarms. And someone tell the Marines to get ready because they are going in. The first fleet opened fire, and the battle for Telesur Prime began in earnest. Concord weapons used elegant energy beams that could be absorbed or deflected by the swarm's organic. Hall's human weapons did not care about elegance or elegance. Accelerated tungsten slugs to a significant fraction of light speed. And when those slugs hit swarm vessels, they did not stop until they punched through the other side. Missile pods launched thousands of warheads that split into submunitions, each one seeking a different target point. Defense networks filled space with so much metal that swarm fighters flew into walls of death. Commander Thiessen watched in stunned silence as human ships carved through the swarm like knives through water. A hive vessel that had taken 6 Keth Ori cruisers to destroy was torn apart in seconds by a concentrated barrage from a single human battleship. Swarm fighters that had swarmed over Concord ships with impunity were shredded by automated defense guns that tracked and fired faster than any living crew could manage. But it was the boarding actions that truly showed what humanity was capable of. Dropships launched from the human carriers, sleek vessels that dodged through enemy fire with impossible agility. They latched onto swarm hive ships and cut through the organic hulls, disgorging squads of soldiers in powered armor that made them look like metal giants. The Concord had abandoned ground combat millennia ago, considering it barbaric and unnecessary in an age of space warfare. Humanity had never stopped practicing it. Marines fought through corridors filled with acid and claws and teeth, their weapons spitting fire and death in every direction. They planted charges in vital systems, destroyed breathing chambers, and killed anything that moved with a ferocity that the swarm had never encountered. A swarm queen mind reached out with its vast consciousness to understand these new enemies. It touched the thoughts of a human Marine and recoiled in shock at what it found there. The alien mind was not filled with fear or desperation. It was filled with rage. Cold and controlled and utterly relentless, the human knew she might die in this battle. And she did not care. She was going to kill as many of the enemy as possible before that happened. And she was going to enjoy doing it for the first time in 12,000 years. The swarm felt something it had never experienced before. Doubt these creatures should have been easy prey. Soft and fragile and short-lived. Instead, they fought like demons, refusing to retreat, refusing to surrender, refusing to die. Admiral Tanaka watched the battle unfold and allowed herself a small smile. The swarm expected prey, she said to her bridge crew. They found predators instead. She opened a channel to the Concord ships, still observing from a safe distance. You can join us or you can watch, she told Commander Thiessen. Either way, we are going to save your worlds. You can thank us later. The battle raged for hours, and when it was over, the space above Telesur Prime was filled with the burning wreckage of swarm vessels. The First Fleet had taken losses, but they had destroyed a force 10 times their size. It was not a victory yet. Not while the main swarm fleet still advanced through Concord space, but it was a beginning. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, and the galaxy would never forget this day. The galaxy laughed at humans. Until the first fleet arrived, the war spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. And humanity was at the center of every battle. Word of the victory at Telesur Prime traveled faster than any ship could fly. Carried by desperate hope from system to system, the Concord species, who had mocked humans for a century, now begged them for help. Admiral Tanaka received requests for assistance from worlds she had never heard of. From species that had once called her people primitive insects. She helped them. Anyways, First Fleet became the second, and third and fourth, as humanity committed everything they had to the fight. Ships that had been built in secret for generations now flew openly. And soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment finally had their chance to prove themselves. The swarm was vast beyond counting. But humans had something the swarm could not understand. They had purpose. Every human soldier knew exactly what they were fighting for. They were fighting for Earth, and for the colonies, and for the future of their species. They were fighting to prove that the galaxy had been wrong about them, and they were fighting because they refused to let the darkness win. Sergeant Major Elena Rodriguez led her Marine company through the twisted corridors of a swarm hive ship. That was 3 times the size of any human vessel. The walls pulsed with organic matter that seemed to breathe, and the air was thick with spores that would have killed an unprotected human. In seconds, her powered armor filtered the air and enhanced her strength and kept her alive in conditions that would destroy any Concord soldier behind her. 50 Marines moved in perfect formation, their weapons ready, their training taking over where thought could note. A wave of swarm warriors poured around a corner ahead. Creatures of chitin and blade that existed only to kill. Rodriguez did not hesitate. "Contact front," she shouted, and her company opened fire as one magnetic accelerator rifles tore through the alien horde. Each round punching through multiple bodies before stopping. The swarm pushed forward despite their losses, climbing over the corpses of their own kind to reach the humans when they got close enough. The Marines switched to blades and fists and teeth. Rodriguez crushed the warrior's skull with her armored gauntlet and used its body as a shield against the next attackers. She had killed hundreds of these creatures in the past 3 years, and she had stopped counting long ago. A voice crackled through her communication system. Calm despite the chaos around them. "Sergeant Major, we have located the neural cluster 200 meters ahead. The path is heavily defended, but if we can plant charges there, this entire ship dies." Rodriguez kicked the warrior away and checked her ammunition. Half empty, but enough. "All units, advance," she ordered. "We did not come here to retreat." The company pushed forward through a storm of claws and acid, losing soldiers with every step. Private Chun went down with a blade through his chest. Corporal Okonkwo was dragged into a side passage by a creature twice his size. Lieutenant Park detonated a grenade in her own hand to take out a cluster of warriors that had surrounded Irby. The time they reached the neural cluster, only 12 Marines were still standing. Rodriguez looked at the massive organic structure that pulsed with the thoughts of millions of swarm creatures. This was the brain of the hive ship, the center of its consciousness. Destroying it would kill every warrior on board and deal a blow to the swarm's distributed intelligence. She planted the charges herself, taking extra time to make sure they were positioned perfectly. "All units, fall back to extraction point," she said. "Timer is set for 3 minutes." They ran through corridors that were already starting to panic as the ship somehow sensed its impending death. Warriors that had been organized and deadly were now confused and disoriented. Easy targets for the retreating Marines. Rodriguez was the last one through the airlock, and she turned to watch through the viewport as the charges detonated. The hive ship split apart from the inside. its death scream echoing through the minds of every swarm creature in the system across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out day after day. Human soldiers fought in conditions that would have broken any other species. They stormed asteroid fortresses and cleared orbital stations and landed on planets covered in swarm biomass. They died by the thousands, and they kept fighting anyway. Swarm Queen Mind studied these creatures with growing alarm. It had consumed countless civilizations across millions of years, and none of them had resisted like this. The Concord species fought out of fear. Desperate to survive, humans fought out of something else entirely. Something the Queen Mind could not identify or understand. When Concord soldiers were cornered, they surrendered or fled. When humans were cornered, they attacked harder. When Concord ships were damaged, they retreated to repair. When human ships were damaged, they rammed enemy vessels and detonated their reactors. It was not logical, and it was not efficient. And it should not have worked, but it was working. The swarm's advance slowed for the first time in 12,000 years. Worlds that should have fallen in days held for weeks, because human garrisons refused to give up. Fleets that should have been destroyed escaped because human ships sacrificed themselves to cover retreats. The Queen Mind reached out to touch the collective thoughts of the swarm and felt something it had never experienced. Hive was afraid not of death, because the swarm did not fear death the way individual creatures did. It was afraid of these small soft beings who fought like they had nothing to lose. It was afraid of creatures who looked at the endless tide of the swarm and said, "Not today." Admiral Tanaka received reports from every front and planned the final campaign. The war had cost humanity more than anyone had expected. Entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but conflict. Families had been torn apart, colonies destroyed, dreams sacrificed on the altar of survival. But they had held the line. They had bought time for the Vostel Concord to reorganize and rebuild, and now they were ready to end this war once and for all. She called her fleet commanders together and presented her plan. The Queen Mind is located in a system at the center of the swarm's territory, she explained. It coordinates all swarm activity and destroying. It will break their organization. Our fleet will punch through their defensive line and strike at the heart of the enemy. This will not be easy, and many of us will not come back. She looked around the room at humans who had given everything for this war. But we will finish what we started, she said. We will show the galaxy what humanity can do when we stop hiding and start fighting. We will make them remember our names. The commanders saluted and went to prepare their ships. The final battle was coming, and humanity would face it the same way they had faced every challenge since they first looked up at the stars, together, unafraid, and absolutely determined to win. The galaxy laughed at humans until the first fleet arrived. The final battle began in a system with no name, a place where the swarm had built their greatest fortress around the consciousness of the Queen Mind. 7,000 human ships faced a fleet of nearly 50,000 swarm vessels, numbers that should have made victory impossible. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Perseverance and watched the enemy formation fill her tactical display. 3 years of war had aged her in ways that time alone could not. But her eyes were still sharp, and her mind still clear. All ships report ready, her first officer announced. Tanaka nodded and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Tanaka," she said. "Today we end this war. Many of us will not live to see tomorrow, but those who fall will be remembered forever. We fight for Earth, for our children, and for every species in this galaxy that deserves a chance to survive. The swarm thinks it cannot be stopped. Show them how wrong they are." The human fleet surged forward. And the greatest battle in galactic history began. Swarm ships moved to intercept. Their numbers so vast that they blocked out the stars' human weapons fired in coordinated waves. Each shot calculated to deal maximum damage with minimum loss to radans. Tore through hive ships and missiles, split into thousands of warheads that sought out critical targets. The swarm fought back with everything they had. Acid cannons and boarding pods and waves of fighters that seemed endless. Ships on both sides burned and died, their wreckage adding to the chaos of the battlefield. The Perseverance led the charge toward the Queen Mind's fortress, a structure the size of a small moon that pulsed with organic life. Admiral Tanaka directed her ship through a maze of enemy fire, trusting her crew to keep them alive. All batteries focus on the fortress defenses, she ordered. Clear a path for the landing force behind the dreadnought. Dozens of troop carriers waited for their chance to breach the fortress walls. Sergeant Major Rodriguez was aboard one of those carriers. Her company reduced to 30 soldiers after years of constant combat. They were tired and scarred and had lost friends beyond counting, but they were not finished yet. The Perseverance took hit after hit from the fortress weapons, and sections of the great ship began to fail. Admiral Tanaka refused to pull back even as fire spread through the lower decks. Hold course, she commanded. We are almost in position. Swarm ram ships struck the Perseverance along its left side. Tearing through armor and bulkheads, the bridge shook violently, and warning lights filled every display. First Officer Chun shouted damage reports that grew worse with every second. The main engines were failing, and the starboard weapons array was destroyed, and a third of the crew was already dead. Tanaka gripped her command chair and made a decision that would be remembered for centuries. All hands abandon ship, she announced. Calmly, the Perseverance will complete her mission. It has been an honor serving with you all. She locked the navigation controls to continue toward the fortress and watched as her crew evacuated in escape pods. When she was alone on the bridge, she opened one final channel to the fleet. This is Tanaka, she said. Continue the attack. Do not stop until the Queen Mind is dead. Then she aimed her dying ship at the heart of the fortress and held her course. The Perseverance struck the fortress like a hammer from the gods, a remaining reactor core detonating on impact. The explosion tore a hole in the structure kilometers wide, exposing the inner chambers to the void of space. Rodriguez watched from her carrier as the dreadnought sacrificed itself. That was for all of us, she said quietly. Then she turned to her soldiers. Our turn now. Let us finish what she started. The carriers flew through the breach in the fortress, and Marines poured out into the alien structure. They fought through corridors that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, killing everything that moved. The Queen Mind reached out with its vast consciousness to stop them, but it found that it could not. Human minds were closed to its influence, immune to the psychic commands that controlled the swarm. For the first time in millions of years, the Queen Mind felt true terror. Rodriguez led her company toward the central chamber where the Queen Mind's physical form resided. They lost soldiers at every junction, but they did not stop when they finally reached the chamber. Only Rodriguez and 5 others were still alive. The Queen Mind loomed before them, a massive organic brain suspended in fluid, connected to the entire swarm by tendrils that stretched across light years. Why do you fight so hard? It asked, its voice echoing directly in their minds. You are small and weak, and your lives are so brief. What do you hope to accomplish against something as eternal as the swarm? Rodriguez planted a charge at the base of the chamber and looked up at the ancient intelligence. You have been killing and consuming for millions of years, she replied. You think that makes you powerful, but we have been surviving against impossible odds for our entire existence. We crawled out of the mud and reached for the stars. And we did it in the blink of an eye by your standards. She armed the charges and smiled. That is what makes us dangerous. We do not wait for evolution to save. We save ourselves. The Queen Mind tried to stop them. But it was too late. The charges detonated. And the consciousness that had controlled the swarm for millions of years simply stopped existing across the galaxy. Swarm creatures suddenly lost their connection to the hive mind ships, stopped moving, and warriors collapsed, and the endless tide finally came to an end. The war was over. Humanity had won 3 months later. The Concord assembled in their great hall to discuss the future of the Galaxy Ambassador. Vather stood at the same podium where he had once mocked humanity. But now his voice was humble. We invited the humans to join us as equals, he announced. They declined. Murmurs filled the chamber. They said they do not need our recognition. Vather continued. They said they proved their worth with blood and sacrifice. And no ceremony could add to that. They asked only to be left alone to rebuild and mourn their dead. He paused and looked down at his notes. In a century. We laughed at them. In 3 years. They saved us all. Perhaps we should consider what else we have been wrong about on Earth. The survivors of the war gathered to remember those who had fallen. Admiral Tanaka's name was carved into a monument that stood 100 meters tall. Alongside the names of millions who had given their lives. Captain Chen, now old and gray, stood before the monument with tears on her face. We showed them, she whispered. We showed them all. Far away. In the outer reach, a new generation of humans looked up at the stars. They knew the stories of the war, had grown up hearing tales of sacrifice and courage and impossible victory. Galaxy no longer laughed at humanity. It watched them with something between respect and fear, wondering what these strange creatures might accomplish next. And somewhere in the void between stars, a small probe carried a message to whatever civilizations might exist beyond the galaxy. The message was simple. This space is protected by the Terran hegemony. We do not seek conflict, but we do not run from it either. Consider yourselves warned. The stars waited in silence, and humanity continued to reach for them. They had proven that they belonged here, and they would never stop reaching for what lay beyond. That was simply what humans did, was who they had always been.